Yeah, that's the primary music, folks. Politics for breakfast. Good morning and welcome to Early Start, everyone. I'm Christine Romans.
Delicious. I'm Dave Briggs. Wednesday, June 6, 5 a.m. in the East, 2 a.m. in California. The numbers are coming in, constantly being updated as we check out the Democrats' efforts to retake the House. The biggest test thus far of the Democrats' effort there, the California primary. Democrats have been worried about the state's top two or jungle primary system, concerned too many Democrats could split the vote, shutting them out of districts they hope to flip in the fall. Some evidence that may be the case. One big contest has been settled, the race for California governor. A Republican has made it onto the ballot, which could help significantly with down-ballot races in November. CNN's Miguel Marquez live for us this morning. He is in Los Angeles. Miguel, what happened last night in California? Break it all down for us.
Well, it's who's number two in California. That's the important thing out here. So the top two finishers get to go forward. It wasn't very clear for Republicans that they were going to have anyone at the top of the ticket so that they could drive out support for their candidates in November. Now it looks like, certainly for governor, there will be a Republican on the top of the ticket. A businessman, John Cox, will be there. And then on the Senate side, he will face Gavin Newsom. On the Senate side, Dianne Feinstein will either face Kevin De Leon or sort of an unknown Republican from, not very well-known Republican from Laguna Niguel, Jim Bradley. So that may also come into to play. The bigger question for the House of Representatives, there were 10 seats that Democrats nationwide were targeting, 7 of those districts that Hillary Clinton won, where Republicans were serving. It wasn't clear because of this mad rush of Democrats into all of those races, and you have this top two primary system, that the vote was so split amongst so many of those races that it wasn't clear that a Democrat was going to advance in a few of them. Now it appears that Democrats will advance in all of them. There are still some questions. The 10th district, the 39th district, and the 48th district, there are either Democrats vying for that number 2 spot, or there are very close numbers between Democrats and Republicans. In this one, you see Dana Rohrabacher will advance. Harley Rouda and Hans Kirstead are fighting it out for number 2. But that Scott Baugh, very popular, well-known Republican in Orange County, he's coming up, on the backside of that, and he may end up getting enough votes because we don't actually know what the final vote is in California. Because what happens here, 2 things happened yesterday. In L.A. County, there were 118,000 people left off the rolls here. That means they had to fill out ballots, paper ballots at the polling station. It will take time to count those. The other thing that happens here, we have early voting and mail-in ballots. So a lot of people walk to their polling station on Election Day, drop off their mail ballot. All those have to be counted. It'll take days, if not weeks, to get through it. California, simple, straightforward, easy.
Always. Nothing's ever complicated in California.
Never. All right, Miguel, thank you. Thank you so much. In other results, CNN projects that Deb Haaland has won the primary for New Mexico's 1st congressional district, putting her on track to become the first Native American woman in Congress. In South Dakota, Congresswoman Kristi Noem well ahead of the Republican primary for governor, making her the favorite to become the state's first female governor.
In Alabama's 2nd district, Republican Martha Roby forced into a runoff next month with former Democratic Congressman Bobby Bright, who ran as a Republican. Roby dropped her support of President Trump back in 2016 in the wake of the Access Hollywood tape. And in New Jersey, Mikey Sherrill, a Navy vet and former federal prosecutor leading in the Democratic primary in the 11th district, has more than twice the total of the leading Republican, Jay Weber. Joining us to talk about all of this in Portland, Oregon tonight, CNN senior political analyst Ron Brownstein, senior editor at The Atlantic.
Hi,
good morning, good evening. We're not sure if you stayed up or if you got up early.
Yeah, we're on the boundary.
Yeah,
on the boundary. Yeah, good morning.
Okay, Ron, let's just talk about this blue wave that was so much anticipated. Again, to go through the numbers that Miguel mentioned, 23 needed to flip the House. 10 were competitive in California, 7 districts won by Hillary Clinton. How essential is California and Democrats' hopes to retake the House?
It is central, but it's not the only side. Overall, it was a good night for Democrats in the House. I mean, they got all of the candidates they wanted in New Jersey, which could have as many as 4 turnover opportunities for them. They had a record turnout in Iowa, potentially the highest primary turnout they've ever had. And in California, as Miguel said, although it could go the other way, in the end, maybe in 1 or 2 of the districts, the likelihood now is that they will not get locked out of any of the targeted seats, you know, going into the election, there was fear about 1, 2, or even 3 in Orange County. And then I think the fourth big thing, you know, of the night, if you look at it, the Democratic preference for female candidates continues in most cases. I mean, both of their Iowa nominees, both of their New Mexico nominees. You mentioned New Jersey, the former, you know, the former prosecutor, and then in California against Steve Knight and Mimi Walters, 2 of the other Republicans in districts that Hillary Clinton carried. They also chose female nominees over male opponents. So banking, I think, very heavily on the gender gap, which is real at this point about Donald Trump and attitudes toward the GOP. But overall, Democrats, I think, got almost everything they wanted out of Tuesday night, with the possible exception of not getting the 1-2 in the governor's race in California.
And we'll still keep an eye on the 48th and the 10th, where they still potentially could get locked off the ballot.
Right.
So we'll watch that in the next hour.
For a while, we'll have to keep an eye on it.
You talk about the women and the role, you know, these women, these exciting women candidates who did well last night. And so that is in part, you know, that is against Donald Trump. That is a movement against Donald Trump. But when you look within the Republicans, though, for example, John Cox came up there and did very well because of support from Donald Trump. It depends on what party you're in, how Trump plays both ways.
Absolutely. Right. No, first of all, you know, as we've talked about this before, I think the gender gap is somewhat overrated. Historically, there are other factors that matter more, married versus single, college versus non-college. But it is real under Donald Trump. I was just looking yesterday in the weekly Gallup average. I mean, they poll, you know, enormously every night. Donald Trump's approval rating among women, all women, is 12 points lower than his approval rating among men. And particularly among those college-educated white women, Democrats have been polling better than at any point in the past 25 years in the generic ballot for Congress. I mean, they are absolutely key to Democratic hopes in November. And one thing I wonder about a lot is whether all of these female candidates are going to help Democrats do better than the first female major party nominee did among blue-collar white women. And the big reason why Donald Trump is president is because he won so many working-class white women, particularly in the Midwest. Can Democrats do better? On the flip side, you're right. Look, the Republican opposition, the resistance in the Republican Party to Donald Trump has collapsed as an electoral phenomenon. And, you know, he is a powerful figure in the party, remains a deeply polarizing figure in the country. So you have Republican candidates who are being pulled almost magnetically toward him, particularly on immigration, where the very hard line on immigration has become very common among Republican candidates. And we're going to see that in California in a race that is, you know, generally most analysts consider over as of today for the actual governorship.
It's a number I've mentioned before for good reason. Donald Trump's at 87% with his own party, the second highest number Gallup has ever tracked, only behind President Bush post 9/11. The economy is healthy. We're at least on the verge of a major breakthrough on the Korean Peninsula. So has the resistance collapsed, or is Donald Trump just kind of turning the tide and people are waking up to say, well, you know, things are pretty good in this country right now?
Republicans agree with his policies overall, and he is getting the benefit of kind of the good economy to some extent among the general electorate. But he himself, the way he conducts himself, the way he approaches the presidency, there are no set of policy accomplishments that can completely erase those concerns and the polarization around that. And, you know, as we saw yesterday, there is still a lot of energy in the Democratic opposition to Donald Trump. There were a lot of people voting yesterday. You know, we saw that record turnout in Iowa. He is still somewhere in the low to mid 40s in public opinion. And so I think, you know, the question, because of his success among Republicans, as I've written, I think this is becoming a more conventional midterm. I mean, it appears that the hopes of Democrats early on that big chunks of the Republican coalition would shear off away from Donald Trump, almost like an iceberg calving into the ocean. That's not going to happen, it doesn't look like. And if they are going to take back the House, House, they're going to have to solve their usual midterm problem, which is turning out more Latino voters, more African-American voters, more young voters whose participation tends to fall off in the midterm. Some mixed signals from California on that, by the way.
And look, what is the Democratic Party for? What are the Democrats for in 2018? Not just what are they resisting against. And I think that some of the excitement among some of these Democratic women who did well last night, like Maggie Sherrill, is that they, despite what seems to be a party that doesn't have a mission at the moment except for anti-Trump, there's some excitement among those individual women who are running, Ron.
Absolutely. Well, the closest thing to a mission, I think, that they've articulated, and probably their best asset in terms of the kind of voters I was talking about before, blue-collar women, is healthcare, is protecting healthcare.
Right.
Both.
That was big in Iowa. That was really big in Iowa last night.
I think the argument that if you return the Republican majority with the possibility of expanding the majority in the Senate because of where the contests are, that they will come back and try again to repeal the ACA, not to mention go after Medicare somewhere down the road to pay for their tax cut. I think that is probably the single most effective policy argument that Democrats will have. But I still think that the overriding energy here is the idea that Trump is just barreling through so many norms of the way the president conducts himself in terms of his attitude toward federal law enforcement, the way he talks about race, the way he talks about, opponents in society, and that Republicans in Congress are not providing any real oversight or check or constraint. That is the engine on the Democratic side in terms of their turnout. They do have to find that policy argument for those last few voters, and so far, health care, I think, is by far their best arrow in that quiver.
Well, you're really seeing two totally different types of Democrats win. You're seeing progressives and you're seeing conservative Democrats, so it's hard to find one overarching narrative. All right, Ron Brownstein, we'll check back with you again in about 30 minutes. Thank you. Ahead, Mexico makes good on its promise, imposing new tariffs on billions of American products. Steel, cheese, pork, bourbon, and other products straight from Trump country. More next.
In Mexico making good on its trade threat, announcing tariffs on $3 billion worth of U.S. goods. Retaliation for the U.S. steel and aluminum tariffs imposed last week. The list includes an equal tariff on steel, 25%, 20% on farm products like pork, apples, and cranberries, 25% on cheese and bourbon. That last one is strategic. It hurts Kentucky, home of Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. In fact, Mexico tailored its list to hit states governed by senior Republicans. The Trump administration is using tariffs to force trade concessions from other countries like China. The Wall Street Journal reports China will buy $70 billion in U.S. goods if the U.S. agrees to abandon its tariff threats. Mexico and Canada also, especially as NAFTA renegotiations drag on. Economic advisor Larry Kudlow says the president now wants to take a different approach.
His preference now, and he asked me to convey this, is to actually negotiate with Mexico and Canada separately.
Adding that Trump prefers bilateral negotiations.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell canceling most of the Senate's August recess. McConnell says it will allow lawmakers to pass spending bills and approve more of President Trump's nominees. Republican leaders and the president have been frustrated by Democratic filibusters slowing business in the Senate. McConnell's decision heads off a potential spat with the White House that could hurt the GOP in midterm elections. The decision not sitting well with Democrats, many of whom would rather be home campaigning.
Republican senators say President Trump has promised to give Congress a vote on any nuclear deal he strikes with Kim Jong-un. GOP senators say any deal would be in the form of a treaty, which requires the support of 2/3 of the Senate. In the Oval Office Tuesday, the president suggested the summit next week could last a couple of days.
The White House press aide who made a badly inappropriate remark about John McCain's health is done at the White House. Kelly Sadler was let go Tuesday. Not clear if she is relocating within the administration or leaving entirely. Sadler was widely criticized for her comment that McCain's opposition to Gina Haspel as CIA director didn't matter because he was dying anyway. The White House refused to condemn the remark, and Sadler did not apologize publicly.
A White House contractor arrested on attempted murder charges as he arrived at work Tuesday morning. The Secret Service says it was notified Monday that 29-year-old Martise Edwards was the subject of an arrest warrant in Maryland.
A source tells CNN Edwards was working for the National Security Council. We're told his badge only allowed him access to the executive office building near the White House, not the West Wing. Education Secretary Betsy DeVos says guns will not be a focus of the Federal School Safety Commission. During a Senate hearing, DeVos told lawmakers the focus will be on keeping students safe, but claimed guns are not part of the commission's charge, even though the White House said age restrictions for certain firearm purchases would be on the agenda. The commission was formed after the February's Florida school shooting that killed 17 people in Parkland.
Shock and sadness following the apparent suicide of iconic designer Kate Spade. She was 55 years old. A New York police source says Spade was found hanged by a scarf tied to a doorknob in her apartment. Officials say a suicide note was found at the scene. In it, Spade addressed her daughter and her husband, though the context is not totally clear. The designer launched the Kate Spade New York brand in 1993 and opened her first shop in the city 3 years later. Many fans and friends, including celebrities like Chelsea Clinton and Ivanka Trump, posted fond remembrances online. And for an entire generation of American women, actually women around the world.
No question.
Your first paycheck when you came into adulthood was, you know, digging deep and buying that Kate Spade bag.
My memories of my wife having her first one.
Absolutely.
Such a sad story. Ahead, two of the biggest NBA stars defending the Philadelphia Eagles. How do they plan to handle a White House invite? Welcome. All right, LeBron James and Steph Curry both say no matter who wins the NBA Finals, neither team will be going to the White House anytime soon.
A guy who looks an awful lot like Andy Scholes is here. There he is. Welcome back. Andy Scholes is here at the Bleacher Report. Nice to see you.
Thank you very much, guys. It's been a while. Happy to be back with you. Now, both LeBron and Steph Curry, you know, they've been asked about this many times before. And again, yesterday, asked about a potential trip to the White House if they win the NBA Finals. And LeBron saying, you know, he was not surprised when he heard that the Eagles had been disinvited by President Trump.
It's typical of him. And I'm not surprised. No matter who wins this series, no one wants to invite anyway, so it won't be Golden State or Cleveland going.
I agree with Bron. Pretty sure the way we handled things last year, kind of stayed consistent with that.
And in a statement, the White House says they canceled the Eagles event because not many players were coming. It was worth the glory, right?
Yeah, it was. All right. Andy Scholes, nice to see you.
Effort. I love it.
Democratic hopes to retake the House face a big test in the California primaries, but a big win on the Republican side could help the GOP in November. We'll explain.
All right, 8 states go to the polls last night, but it's all about one in particular, California. Welcome back. Too early start. I'm Dave Briggs.
And I'm Christine Romans. 31 minutes past the hour on this Wednesday morning after Tuesday primaries. And overnight, the biggest test so far in Democrats' effort to retake the House, that California primary. Democrats have been worried about the state's top two jungle primary system, concerned that too many Democratic candidates could split the vote, shutting them out of districts they hope to flip this fall. There is already some evidence that may be the case.
One big contest has been settled, the race for California governor. A Republican has made it onto the ballot, which could certainly help with down-ballot races come November. CNN's Miguel Marquez live for us this morning in Los Angeles. Good to see you, Miguel. How significant is the gubernatorial number for Republicans?
For Republicans, it is very significant. They weren't sure they were going to have anybody at the top of the ticket here across California. For the watchword, the watch phrase for California is who is number two. So John Cox, a businessman, will face former San Francisco Mayor Gavin Newsom for the governor's race. They may also have a candidate facing Feinstein, Senator Feinstein for the Senate. The race for number two there is very close between Kevin DeLeon and Jim Bradley, a chief financial officer of a company. Democrats had targeted 10 seats across California. Remember, there's 53 House seats in California, 14 only held by Republicans. Democrats are targeting 10. 7 of those are districts that Hillary Clinton won. They thought they could flip them. But there were so many Democrats that came into these races because of that top two system. They spread out the vote, split the vote so much, it was a concern that they weren't going to make it. It looks like in all those races, a Democrat will advance, but there are still some questions out there. Certainly the 10th, Jeff Denham, there's a very close race for number two in that race. And the 48th, that's the Dana Rohrabacher race, he will advance, but there is a very tight race between number 2, 3, and 4 in that race. 2 Democrats and a Republican who are duking it out for second place in the 48th. All of this could take days or weeks to figure out. In L.A. County, there were 118,000 people were left off the ballot, so they had to fill out provisional ballots, which will take time to count. The other thing that happens in California is that people walk in with their mail-in ballots, slip them in a box. They then have to be opened, separated, ensure that they're the correct ballots, and counted. All of that takes days or weeks. Clear as mud in California. Back to you.
Love that. All right, Miguel, thank you so much for that. In other results, CNN projects Deb Haaland has won the primary for New Mexico's 1st congressional district, putting her on track to become the first Native American woman in Congress. In South Dakota, Congresswoman Kristi Noem, well ahead of the Republican primary for governor, making her the favorite to become the state's first female governor.
In Alabama's 2nd District, Republican Martha Roby forced into a runoff next month with former Democratic Congressman Bobby Bright, who ran as a Republican. Roby dropped her support of President Trump back in 2016 in the wake of the Access Hollywood tape. And in New Jersey, Mikey Sherrill, a Navy vet and a former federal prosecutor, leading in the Democratic primary in the 11th District. She has more than twice the total of the leading Republican, Jay Weber.
She raised some significant money, $2.9 million, I think, there. Okay, let's bring back CNN senior political analyst Ron Brownstein. What do you see here? I mean, you mentioned how you saw women in these races. Mikey Sherrill is a good example, doing well.
Well, look, first, overall, it was a good night for the Democrats. Overall, in their drive to try to take back the House, they got the candidates they wanted in all of the contested races in New Jersey. And New Jersey may ultimately flip as many seats as California, although we focus more on California for obvious reasons. They had record turnout in Iowa. And in California, as Miguel said, while there are still votes to be counted, it appears as of right now they may have avoided what seemed almost certain, which is getting locked out of 1 or 2 or even potentially 3 of the seats that they were targeting for this fall under this unusual top 2 primary system in California, which isn't really accurately described as a primary at all. It's something of a hybrid between the chaos of a primary and the consequences of a general election. And I wonder if voters are going to look at it again. And so they basically got what they wanted out of the election, and particularly in California, you know, we don't often give credit to the party campaign committees. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee takes a lot of grief from party activists for when they do intervene or when they don't intervene in races, but they pretty much threw the kitchen sink at trying to avoid any shutouts in California. And if, in fact, this holds, and they did avoid some, they have to claim some of the credit.
So what they're hoping there is to flip some or all of the 7 districts that Hillary Clinton carried. Yeah. But if they can get those 7, or if they can get 5, that's of the 23 needed to take back control of the House. How significant is their efforts right there in California? And are you seeing energy of that blue wave we've so much discussed?
Yeah, well, mixed signals on that. First of all, Dave, I think one thing that's really striking to me is how many of the 23 seats, how big a share of them, they can win back in states that are essentially blue. The Republican holdouts in states that have become more Democratic at the presidential level. I mean, if you look at New York, New Jersey, Illinois, Minnesota, California, and the suburban seats around Philadelphia, which have been reliably Democratic since Clinton in 1992, that would take you almost all of the way, or potentially all of the way, toward the 23. So part of this, a big part of this, is finding ways to, purge out, beat Republicans who are in these red pockets of otherwise blue places. They're not going to win all 7, in all likelihood, of those California seats that Hillary Clinton won. In many cases, Democrats have not won any other statewide contest in those congressional districts in the last several years. So several of them are challenging, but they got through, in some ways, the biggest risk on a number of them last night, which was, as you point out, the possibility that these large Democratic fields could splinter the vote. Now, when you look at places like in California, in Orange County, the seats being vacated by retiring Republicans, Ed Royce and Darrell Issa, the Dana Rohrabacher seat, where he's an incumbent who only got about 30% of the votes, those are real opportunities. Steve Knight in the 25th. And as we talked about, in a number of these cases, and as in other states like Iowa, New Jersey, and New Mexico, the trend of Democrats banking on female candidates continues big time. I mean, the gender gap can be overrated historically, I think, in a lot of different ways, but this year it looks like a real phenomenon, and certainly that is where Democrats are putting a lot of chips on their hopes of taking back the House.
Let's talk about the gubernatorial race in California. You know, it shows you how valuable a couple of tweets from the president can be in a party where, as Dave keeps pointing out, like 87% approval. of the president among Republicans. Look at Antonio Villaraigosa. That was a big surprise there. But John Cox, he had the beneficiary of a couple of tweets from the President of the United States and just leapfrogged above Antonio Villaraigosa.
And also, Christina, interestingly, it was the beneficiary of a lot of spending by Gavin Newsom. And this was the big debate among Democrats. On the one hand, you had most national Democrats arguing that the party would have been better off with both Newsom and Villaraigosa in the final two, because on the one hand, that would have kept out any Republican, right? So there would have been no Republican on top of the kid to drive Republican turnout. And on the other hand, you would have had a first Latino, with potential to be governor, and that could have increased Latino turnout in California. So most national Democrats thought a Democrat-Democrat race was better. Newsom very strenuously argued the opposite. Now, he, obviously it's in his interest to be facing Cox in the general because he has so much of a, greater likelihood. He's virtually certain to win in a general. But Newsom argued that a Democrat-Democratic race would divide the party, would lead to a lot of money being spent that didn't need to be spent on an intra-party fight, and that, in fact, you'd be better off with him against a Republican, and they can do a kind of more coordinated turnout drive and all of that. He spent a lot of money promoting Cox and trying to tear down Villaraigosa, which succeeded. So now we're going to see a road test of that argument, his argument, which again coincides with his self-interest, that the party is better off if he's facing Cox than Villaraigosa.
Well, speaking of intra-party feuds, what is the message that Democrats are taking to the voters? Are they split on what type of candidate they want to see, whether it's a progressive or whether it's more the conservative Conor Lamb type of Democrat?
Yeah. Look, I mean, you're never going to get, consistency on that all across the country. I mean, these districts are different. Sure. But I do think that, and there are definitely different shadings. I mean, you look even last night at the seat against Mimi Walters, where the more progressive kind of Sanders Warren-esque candidate beat a more centrist candidate to face Mimi Walters in Irvine, California. So those differences are going to be there. But I think in practice, you may not see as much differentiation in what they are kind of trying to sell to voters. I still think, as we talked about before, the closest thing Democrats have gotten to a message for the midterm is around health care and the idea that if you return to Republicans to Congress, they will take another run at repealing the Affordable Care Act, that the actions the president is already taking is resulting in big premium increases that we've seen in a number of states, and that the tax cut will eventually require them, for any kind of fiscal sanity, to go after Medicare and Medicaid again. And I do think that will be kind of a central argument for Democrats in the fall. But clearly, what drives this election from the point of view of Democrats is the notion that Republicans in Congress, after initially, when Donald Trump was elected, trying to take a more kind of independent posture toward him, have kind of really abandoned any notion of oversight or check or constraint. And I think the core question before voters, although Democratic candidates are probably not going to articulate this and emphasize it in advertising, is do you want to give an unfettered a hand to the president, or do you want to reimpose some kind of check on a president on whose policies people may agree, some people may like, but whose temperament still leaves many voters uncertain?
Interesting. I think that Iowa turnout is really interesting. Some of these counties, Ron, say the turnout was bigger than even among Democrats in 2006. Remember what happened then? That was when they minted a guy nobody heard of named Barack Obama, essentially, elevating him to what would become the presidency. So I don't know what to make of it just yet, but there's a lot of energy happening in places like Iowa right now.
More state legislative flips as well last night. I mean, the turnout among Democrats is more positive for them than the generic ballot polling. So you have kind of two mixed signals going on the macro level.
Lots to keep our eye on. All right, Ron, thanks so much. Ahead, the White House claiming canceling the Eagles' visit was the team's fault. Was the president actually smart to cancel? Did he have any choice? And does the president know the words to God Bless America?
Let's get a check on CNN Money this morning. Global stocks higher right now after the Nasdaq had a great day. It hit its second straight record high. That rally in tech pushed all of Wall Street higher. Corporate tax cuts fueled another buyback bonanza in May. Look at this. American companies took their tax goodies and spent it on buying back their own stock, a record $201 billion buying back their own stock. Apple made up nearly half of that. Last month, Apple pledged to spend $100 billion on stock buybacks. For the first time in at least 20 years, there are more job openings right now than there are workers to fill them. The Labor Department says the ratio of job seekers to job openings dropped below 1 in April. That's the first time since it started keeping track back in 2000. There are a whole bunch of jobs open today, 6.7 million open jobs. There are 6.3 million Americans who are officially unemployed. That low ratio could help boost wages. Wage growth has picked up in recent months, but not by much. So look at these numbers. Why can't the unemployed workers, 6.3 million, just step into those open 6.7 million jobs? A couple of problems here. Open jobs are not in the same place as the people who are looking for work right now. And skills. The available workers, in many cases, do not have the skill set that employers need. JetBlue does not want your emotional support hedgehog on its flights. The latest airline to tighten rules for emotional support animals. Starting July 1, only cats, dogs, and miniature horses are allowed on board. No more hedgehogs, ferrets, snakes, spiders, and any animals with tusks. Darn it. JetBlue also wants more documentation about an animal's health and behavior, citing risks from untrained animals in its cabins. Unlike pets, support animals don't have to be crated, and they ride for free. So airlines have seen a huge spike in recent years, and other airlines have had problems with dog bites and animals getting lost and snakes on planes, and they're just trying to get control of all this.
I've only seen a dog. Have you seen anything? Have you seen a hedgehog?
I haven't. I have
emotional support hedgehog.
My children. I'm trying to keep track of my children. I don't usually notice other people's problems.
Let us know, folks. All right, storms and heavy rain possible for parts of the plains and Gulf Coast. Here's meteorologist Karen McGinnis.
Dave and Christine, just about 4 million people today running the risk of some severe weather as we watch a weather disturbance move across the Dakotas, eventually making its way towards Minnesota and into Iowa. Large hail, gusty winds. Can't rule out an isolated tornado, but it does look like the wind and the heavy rainfall will be the major portion of it. All right, we kind of forecast out what the radar is anticipating. You see late in the day from Minneapolis, Des Moines, looks like a pretty good line of showers and storms moving through there, but eventually we'll expect some of that wet weather for Chicago and into Indianapolis. There's another little weather maker just kind of stalled down along the Gulf Coast region. That'll trigger some showers and storms all along the Gulf Coast. You may remember a couple of weeks ago it was Alberto. So this lingering weather system is just going to plague this area for a while. Enjoy the nice weather in New York and Washington, D.C. and Boston, because you know what? As we head towards the weekend, those rain chances go up, just like we knew that it would. Anyway, weather disturbance moves through New York. Coming up for today, though, high temperature of 70. Back to you guys.
All right, Karen, thank you so much for that.
Ahead, iconic designer Kate Spade dead of an apparent suicide, an outpouring of support from friends and fans around the world. More next.
Welcome back. The White House claims the Philadelphia Eagles are to blame for the cancellation of Tuesday's Super Bowl celebration, accusing the players of pulling a political stunt. Administration officials insist the decision was only about the national anthem, not about racial issues. The president holding an alternative patriotic celebration, singing along to some of the words from the Star-Spangled Banner and God Bless America. A 7-minute rousing event that featured some controversy. At least one person taking a knee during the anthem, with someone in the crowd yelling this at the president.
Thank you very much, President's decision to cancel the Eagles celebration having a ripple effect on the NBA Finals. Players from the Cavaliers and Warriors not expecting to visit the White House anytime soon.
It's typical of him. I mean, I'm not surprised. No matter who wins this series, no one wants to invite anyway, so it won't be Golden State or Cleveland going.
I agree with Bron. Pretty sure the way we handled things last year, kind of stayed consistent with that.
Last year, the world champion Warriors were disinvited by the White House after some of their players criticized the administration, including Steph Curry.
President Trump goes to FEMA headquarters today for a briefing on the 2018 hurricane season. Recent new estimates put the death toll from Hurricane Maria at more than 4,600, more than Hurricane Katrina, which killed more than 1,800 people. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders was asked if the president would still rate the response to Puerto Rico a 10 out of 10.
The federal response, once again, was at a historic proportion. We're continuing to work with the people of Puerto Rico and do the best we can to provide federal assistance.
First Lady Melania Trump will join the president for the trip to FEMA, making it her first public appearance in front of reporters in nearly a month. She appeared Monday at a private Gold Star Family's reception.
Education Secretary Betsy DeVos says guns will not be a focus of the Federal School Safety Commission. During a Senate hearing, DeVos told lawmakers the focus will be on keeping students safe, but claimed guns are not part of the commission's charge. Even though the White House said age restrictions for certain firearm purchases would be on the agenda. Now, the commission was formed after February's Florida school shooting that killed 17 people. A memorial this morning at Arlington National Cemetery to mark the 50th anniversary of Robert F. Kennedy's assassination. The service will include remarks from former President Clinton as well as Kennedy family members. Questions have been raised recently by RFK's family about whether convicted assassin Sirhan Sirhan was actually responsible.
At least 192 people are missing in Guatemala since the Fuego volcano erupted on Sunday, with death toll now rising to 75 tonight. Another explosion on Tuesday, sending rescue workers scrambling for cover. Hot gas and molten rock still streaming from the volcano, with everyone in the area ordered to evacuate.
Shock and sadness following the apparent suicide of iconic designer Kate Spade. She was 55 years old. A New York police source says Spade was found hanged by a scarf tied to a doorknob in her bedroom in her apartment in New York. Officials say a suicide note was found at the scene. In it, Spade addressed her daughter and her husband, although the context not totally clear. The designer launched the Kate Spade New York brand in 1993, opened her first shop in the city 3 years later. Many fans and friends, including celebrities like Chelsea Clinton and Ivanka Trump, posted fond remembrances online. And for a generation of women, you know, your first paycheck, that's when you bought your first Kate Spade bag, really.
Yeah,
you know,
so
with the label on
iconic.
the outside. Very